The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, spraying crystal fragments across polished Italian shoes. Vincent Moretti didn't flinch. He'd seen worse, done worse. But something about the way his fiancée Elena's laughter cut through the sudden silence made his jaw tighten imperceptibly. "Oops," Elena purred, her red lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How clumsy of me. Perhaps someone should clean that up before the help cuts themselves." The woman who'd been standing nearby, the one Elena had apparently aimed for, stepped back calmly, her modest gray dress untouched by the spray of champagne and glass. She was older, perhaps in her late 50s, with silver threading through dark hair pulled into a simple bun. There was something in her posture, the way she held herself, that reminded Vincent of statues in old cathedrals, immovable, eternal. "My apologies," the woman said quietly, her voice carrying an accent Vincent couldn't quite place. Russian? No. Something else. Something that tugged at memories he'd buried deep. Vincent watched from his position near the bar of the Palazzo Grande, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. His territory, his kingdom. Every person in this room owed him something: money, favors, their lives. The dinner party was a carefully orchestrated display of power, with politicians, judges, and business owners all pretending they'd come for the food rather than to kiss his ring. Elena moved closer to the woman, her Louboutins clicking against the floor with predatory precision. "Apologies? For what exactly? For standing where you don't belong? For wearing that outfit to a place like this?" Vincent's associate, Marco, appeared at his elbow. "Boss, should I—" "No." Vincent's voice was low, controlled. He wanted to see where this went. Elena had always had a vicious streak, but she usually reserved it for rivals in her social circle, not random guests at his events. "I was invited," the woman said quietly, still calm, too calm. Vincent had seen that kind of composure before, in men who'd faced death so many times they'd stopped fearing it. Elena laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut. "Invited? By whom? The catering company?" Several guests nearby chuckled nervously, their eyes darting between Elena and Vincent, trying to gauge the appropriate response. Vincent's face remained impassive, but his mind was working, cataloging details. The woman's hands were steady, her breathing was even. She wasn't intimidated, and that was unusual. Everyone in this room was intimidated by something: him, his reputation, his capacity for violence. But this woman stood there like she was waiting for a bus, mildly inconvenienced but not particularly concerned. "I see you haven't answered my question," Elena continued, circling the woman like a shark who'd scented blood. "Who invited you? Because I certainly didn't approve your name on the guest list, and I oversee every detail of Vincent's events." That wasn't entirely true, and Vincent knew it. Elena liked to think she had control over his world, but there were layers to his organization she'd never see, never understand. She was useful for appearances, beautiful enough to photograph well, connected enough to provide legitimacy, but she wasn't family, not really, not in the way that mattered. "I was invited by someone who felt I should be here," the woman replied, meeting Elena's gaze directly. "Perhaps you should ask your fiancé." Vincent felt something cold slide down his spine. He didn't know this woman. He was certain of it. He'd have remembered her. And yet there was something in the way she looked at him, just for a moment, that made him feel like a child caught stealing cookies from the kitchen. Elena's eyes flashed. "Vincent doesn't associate with people like you. Do you even know who he is, what he's capable of?" "I know exactly who he is, better than you ever will." The room had gone completely quiet now. Even the string quartet in the corner had stopped playing, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Vincent set down his drink and started walking towards them, his steps measured and deliberate. People parted like water before him. If you're enjoying this dramatic confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button because things are about to get a lot more intense. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. "Elena," Vincent said, his voice carrying just enough warning to make several nearby guests flinch. "No, Vincent," Elena interrupted, which was her first mistake. Nobody interrupted Vincent Moretti. "I want to know who this woman thinks she is, coming into our event dressed like she's attending a funeral at a church in some forgotten village." The woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her dark eyes. Pain? Anger? Vincent couldn't tell. He was close enough now to see the details of her face, the fine lines around her eyes, the curve of her jaw. There was something familiar about her, something that made his chest tighten in a way he didn't understand. "My name is Katerina," the woman said. "Katerina Moretti." Vincent froze. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. That name, that surname, it wasn't possible. Elena laughed again, but it sounded forced now. "Moretti, please. I know every member of Vincent's family, and you're certainly not." "Elena, stop talking." Vincent's command was quiet but absolute. He fell silent immediately, confusion replacing the malicious glee on her face. He stared at Katerina, really looked at her for the first time. The shape of her eyes, the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself with her weight slightly forward, like she was ready to move at any moment. He'd seen that stance before, every day of his childhood until he was 12 years old. "That's not possible," he said, his voice rough. "She's dead. My mother is dead." Katerina smiled, and it was sad and knowing all at once. "Your father told you that? How convenient for him." The room exploded into whispers. Vincent could feel the shock rippling through his guests like an earthquake. Elena grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his jacket. "Vincent, what is she talking about? Your mother died when you were a child. You told me." "I told you what I was told," Vincent said, not taking his eyes off Katerina. His mind was racing, trying to process what this meant. His mother, alive, here, and he'd stood by while Elena humiliated her. Marco appeared at his other side, his hand moving toward the weapon concealed under his jacket. "Boss, say the word." "No." Vincent's voice was quiet, absolute. He wanted to see where this went. Elena had always had a vicious streak, but she usually reserved it for rivals in her social circle, not random guests at his events. I prove it. Prove you are who you say you are." Katerina reached into her small purse, moving slowly and deliberately so nobody would think she was reaching for a weapon. She pulled out a photograph, old and creased from years of handling. She held it out to Vincent. He took it with hands that were steadier than he felt. The photograph showed a young woman, maybe 25, holding a baby. She was laughing, her face alight with joy, and the baby, Vincent knew that baby. He'd seen the same photograph in his father's study before it had mysteriously disappeared one day when he was 13. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "I took it with me when I left," Katerina said. "It was one of the few things I could carry." Elena snatched the photograph from his hands, examining it with narrowed eyes. "This proves nothing. It could be anyone. It could be fake." "It's not fake," Vincent said. He knew it wasn't. He remembered that day, or at least he remembered his father telling him about it. His first birthday. His mother had thrown a party, invited half the city. It had been legendary. Katerina reached up slowly and pulled something from around her neck, a locket on a simple chain. She opened it and held it out. Inside were 2 more photographs. One of Vincent as a child, maybe 7 or 8, missing his front teeth and grinning at the camera. The other was of a man Vincent recognized all too well, his father, but younger, softer around the edges, before the years and the violence and the betrayals had hardened him into stone. "My father gave you that locket," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. He remembered it now, a flash of memory so vivid it almost knocked him off balance. His mother wearing that locket every day, touching it whenever she was worried or thinking deeply about something. On our 5th anniversary, Katerina confirmed. He said it was so I could keep both my boys close to my heart always. Elena's face had gone pale. Vincent, this doesn't make sense. Why would your father tell you she was dead if she wasn't? That's an excellent question, Katerina said, her eyes hardening as she looked at Elena for the first time since revealing her identity. Perhaps you should ask him. Oh, but wait, you can't. He's actually dead. That much is true. Before you find out what happened between Vincent's parents and why his mother disappeared, hit that like button and drop a comment below telling me if you think Elena's going to apologize or dig herself deeper. I'm curious what you all think. Vincent's mind was reeling. His father had died 3 years ago, a heart attack in his sleep, quick, painless, more than he deserved considering the blood on his hands. But Vincent had mourned him, had taken over the organization with the weight of legacy on his shoulders. Why didn't you come back? Vincent asked, his voice cracking slightly on the words. Why didn't you try to contact me? I was your son. Katerina's composure finally cracked, just a little. Her eyes grew wet, though no tears fell. You think I didn't try? I sent letters, I called. I even came back once when you were 15. I watched you from across the street as you got into your car to go to school. You looked so much like your father, so much like my husband, and I knew that if I approached you, if I tried to take you away from all this, he would kill me, and then he would kill you, because you would have become a weakness he couldn't afford. That's insane, Elena snapped. Vincent's father would never. You didn't know my husband, Katerina said coldly. You didn't know what he was capable of, what he did, what he built his empire on. Vincent did know. He'd spent the last 3 years running that empire, making decisions that kept him awake at night, doing things that would have horrified the child he'd once been. But someone had to keep order. Someone had to maintain the balance of power that prevented the city from descending into chaos. Tell me what happened. Tell me why you left. Katerina looked around the room at all the curious faces, the politicians and judges and businessmen who were witnessing what should have been a private family moment. Not here, not in front of them. Then where? Somewhere private, somewhere we can talk without an audience. Elena stepped between them, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Absolutely not, Vincent. You can't seriously be considering this. She shows up out of nowhere with a photograph and a locket, and you're just going to believe her? Vincent looked at his fiancée, really looked at her. She was beautiful, he couldn't deny that. Beautiful and ambitious and ruthless in her own way. He'd chosen her because she fit into his world, because she understood the game even if she didn't understand the reality behind it. But in this moment, with his mother standing in front of him for the first time in decades, Elena looked small, petty, cruel in a way that suddenly made him feel sick. Go home, Elena, he said quietly. What? I said go home. This doesn't concern you. Her eyes widened in shock and fury. Doesn't concern me? I'm your fiancé. Everything about you concerns me. Not this, Vincent said firmly. Not tonight. Marco, please escort Elena to her car. Marco moved forward, and for a moment, Vincent thought Elena might actually refuse. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her face contorting with rage. You're going to regret this, she hissed. You're making a fool of yourself in front of everyone. This woman is probably a con artist, and you're falling for it because you have some pathetic need for a mother figure. Vincent's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes must have warned her she'd crossed a line. Elena's anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. Marco, Vincent said again, and this time Marco took Elena's arm gently but firmly. Don't touch me, Elena snapped, yanking her arm away, but she started walking toward the exit, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. At the door, she turned back. When you come to your senses, don't expect me to forget this humiliation." Then she was gone, and the silence she left behind was deafening. Vincent turned to address his guests. "I apologize for the disturbance. Please continue enjoying the evening. The bar is open and dinner will be served shortly." The whispers started immediately, but people began moving again, the spell of the confrontation broken. They would talk about this for weeks, maybe months. The story would spread through the underworld like wildfire. Vincent Moretti's dead mother had returned, and he'd chosen her over his beautiful fiancée. Let that image sink in, because we're about to dive into the most shocking revelations of this story. Comment below if you think Vincent made the right choice, and don't forget to subscribe to see how this family drama unfolds. Vincent gestured toward a private dining room off the main hall. "After you." Katerina nodded and walked ahead of him, her steps steady and sure. She knew where she was going, he realized. She knew the layout of this restaurant. How? Once they were inside the private room with the door closed, Vincent finally let himself feel the full weight of what was happening. His mother, alive, real, standing in front of him. "I don't understand," he said, and he hated how lost he sounded. "I don't understand any of this." Katerina sat down in one of the chairs, and suddenly she looked tired. The composure she'd maintained through Elena's attack, through the revelation of her identity, seemed to drain away. She was just a woman now, a woman who'd lived too hard and seen too much. "What do you want to know?" she asked. "Everything. Start with why my father told me you were dead." "Because to him, I was. The woman he married, the woman who believed in him and supported his rise to power, that woman died the day I found out what he'd done." "What did he do?" Katerina met his eyes, and in hers he saw old pain, old fury that had never quite died. "Because Dmitri wanted out," she said. "He was your father's right hand, his most trusted lieutenant. But he wanted to leave the life, wanted to take his wife and daughters and move to California, start over. Your father couldn't allow that, couldn't let anyone think that leaving the organization was an option. So he made an example of him." Vincent sat down heavily in the chair across from her. His whole life, his whole understanding of his father was crumbling like sand between his fingers. "I found out by accident," Katerina continued. "I overheard my father talking to one of his men. They were laughing about it, about how Dmitri had begged, how he'd cried, and I realized in that moment that I was married to a monster, that the man I loved, the father of my son, was capable of killing his own brother-in-law without remorse. So you left." "I tried to take you with me," Katerina said, and now tears did fall, tracking down her cheeks. "I packed a bag for both of us, but your father caught me before we could get out of the house. He took you from my arms, and he told me if I didn't leave immediately, if I ever tried to contact you or come back, he would kill you, and he would make sure I watched." Vincent's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "He wouldn't have, wouldn't he?" Katerina interrupted. "You knew him, Vincent. You knew what he was. Would he really have hesitated to kill his own son if he thought it would secure his power?" The terrible thing was, Vincent didn't know. He wanted to believe his father had loved him, that family had meant something, but he'd seen his father order deaths without blinking, had watched him torture men for minor betrayals, had learned at his knee that power was the only thing that mattered, and anything that threatened power had to be eliminated. "I've been watching you," Katerina said softly, "all these years. I have people in the organization, people loyal to me from before. They send me reports, photographs. I know about your education, your rise through the ranks. I know about the things you've done to maintain your father's empire." Vincent looked up sharply. "If you have people in my organization, why reveal yourself now? Why come here tonight?" Katerina smiled sadly. "Because I heard you were getting married. Because I heard about Elena, about how cruel she is, how calculating, and I couldn't let you make the same mistake I did. I couldn't let you marry someone who sees you as a tool for her own ambition, rather than a person she loves." "You don't know her," Vincent said, but even as he spoke the words, he wasn't sure he believed them. "Don't I?" Katerina challenged. "Did you see how she acted tonight? The contempt in her voice when she spoke to me? She didn't just mock a stranger, Vincent. She deliberately targeted someone she thought was beneath her, someone she could hurt without consequences. That's who she is. That's who she'll always be." Vincent thought about Elena's face as she'd circled Katerina, the pleasure she'd taken in the humiliation. He'd seen glimpses of that cruelty before, but always directed at others, never at him. He told himself it was just social maneuvering, that she was playing the game the same way he did, but maybe he'd been lying to himself. If you're sitting there thinking about relationships and power dynamics, you're in the right place. Make sure you're subscribed because we're going deeper into Vincent's past and the choices that brought him to this moment. "Tell me about before," Vincent said. "Before everything went wrong, what was it like?" Katerina's expression softened. "You were happy. We were happy. Your father, he wasn't always what he became. When I met him, he was ambitious, yes, but he had limits, lines he wouldn't cross. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that." She reached out and took Vincent's hand, and he let her. Her skin was warm, her grip firm. "You were such a sweet child, curious about everything. You'd follow me around the house asking questions. Why is the sky blue? Where do birds go at night? What happens when we die?" And I'd try to answer as best I could, knowing that your father's world was waiting to claim you, to turn all that curiosity into something harder and colder. "I don't remember," Vincent admitted. "I don't remember being that child." "I know," Katerina said. "Your father made sure of that. He raised you to be his heir, his legacy, no room for softness or doubt." They sat in silence for a moment, Vincent trying to reconcile the mother in front of him with the ghost he'd carried all these years. "The people in my organization who are loyal to you," he said finally, "who are they?" Katerina smiled. "Do you really think I'm going to tell you that? If you're truly your father's son, you'd have them killed by morning. And if I'm not? Then you'll prove it through your actions, not your words." Vincent laughed, surprising himself. "You don't trust easily." "Can I blame you?" "No, I admit. No, I can't." There was a knock at the door and Marco stuck his head in. "Boss, sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation." Vincent stood immediately, his body tensing. "What kind of situation?" "Elena didn't go home. She went to the club on 5th Street where the Sorrentino family has their operation. She's been there for 20 minutes talking to Carlo Sorrentino." Vincent's blood ran cold. The Sorrentinos were rivals, always had been. They'd maintained an uneasy peace for the last few years, but it was fragile at best. If Elena was talking to Carlo, she was either incredibly stupid or incredibly vindictive. Possibly both. "Get the car ready," Vincent ordered. "We're leaving now." He turned back to Katerina. "I have to deal with this."
"I understand," she said, standing. "But Vincent, be careful. Elena has been humiliated tonight. People do dangerous things when their pride is wounded." "I know," he said. Then, impulsively, he added, "Come with me. Stay at one of my properties. We have more to discuss, and I don't want you disappearing again." Katerina hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but on one condition." "What's that?" "Whatever you decide to do about Elena, about the Sorrentinos, about any of this, don't let your father's ghost make the choice for you. You're not him. You don't have to be him." Vincent wanted to believe that was true, but as they left the restaurant and climbed into his armored SUV, he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had set something in motion that he couldn't stop, that the choices he made in the next few hours would define who he was going to be for the rest of his life. The drive to the 5th Street Club took 15 minutes through downtown traffic. Vincent sat in the back with Katerina, Marco driving, and 2 more of his men in a following vehicle. His mind was racing, trying to figure out what Elena was playing at. "She's angry," Katerina said, as if reading his thoughts. "She'll want to hurt you the way she feels you hurt her. By going to the Sorrentinos? That's not just stupid, it's suicidal. Carlo would love an excuse to start a war. Then why isn't he?" That was the question, wasn't it? If Carlo wanted war, Elena had just handed him the perfect excuse. So why the conversation? What was Elena offering him? They pulled up outside the club, a nondescript building with no sign and heavily tinted windows. Vincent knew there were at least a dozen armed men inside, all loyal to Carlo Sorrentino. Walking in there was a risk, but leaving Elena there was worse. "Stay in the car," he told Katerina. "Vincent, please, I need to know you're safe." She studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "Don't do anything your father would have done." He almost smiled at that. "I'll try." Vincent stepped out of the SUV, Marco and 3 other men flanking him immediately. The door to the club opened before they reached it, and one of Carlo's men gestured them inside. The club was dark, lit by red neon and filled with the bass-heavy thump of electronic music. Dancers moved on platforms, their bodies painted with UV-reactive designs that glowed in the blacklights. It was a front, of course. The real business happened in the back rooms, where drugs were cut and packaged, where weapons were stored, where people who owed money came to negotiate for their lives. Carlo Sorrentino sat in a VIP booth, Elena beside him. She looked disheveled now, her hair slightly mussed, her makeup smudged. She'd been crying, Vincent realized, or at least she'd made it look like she'd been crying. Drop a comment right now telling me what you think Elena's plan is, because this is about to get wild. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This story is far from over. "Vincent," Carlo said, his voice smooth and amused. "What an unexpected pleasure. And here I thought you'd be too busy with your little family reunion to pay me a visit." So word had spread already. Of course it had. In their world, information moved faster than money. "Carlo," Vincent replied evenly, "I see you've met my fiancé." "Former fiancé," Elena interjected, her voice sharp. "I think you made that quite clear tonight." Vincent ignored her, keeping his eyes on Carlo. "What's this about?" Carlo smiled, showing too many teeth. "Elena came to me with an interesting proposition. She says you're compromised, that you're making decisions based on emotion rather than business. She thinks maybe the Moretti organization needs new leadership." Vincent felt Marco tense beside him, ready to draw his weapon. But starting a firefight in here would be suicide. They were outnumbered and surrounded. "So what do you think?" Vincent asked, his voice calm despite the fury building in his chest. "I think," Carlo said slowly, "that Elena is a woman scorned, and while that can be useful, it can also be very messy. I'm not interested in messy, Vincent. I'm interested in profit." "So you're not supporting her coup attempt?"
"Coup?" Carlo laughed. "Is that what she told you? No, no. Elena came here offering information in exchange for protection. She seems to think you're going to kill her for going to the Sorrentinos." Vincent finally looked at Elena. Really looked at her. She was scared, he realized, genuinely afraid. Despite all her bravado, all her cruelty, she was just a woman who'd overplayed her hand and didn't know how to get out of it. "I'm not going to kill you, Elena," he said quietly. She blinked, surprise flickering across her face. "You're not?" "No, you're going to leave the city tonight. Marco will escort you to your apartment to pack whatever you can carry, and then you're getting on a plane. I don't care where you go, but you don't come back." "You can't do that," Elena protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "I just did. And Elena," he waited until she met his eyes, "if you ever speak about my mother that way again, if you ever speak about my family at all, I won't be so generous. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. Real ones this time, Vincent thought. Fear and humiliation and the crushing realization that she'd lost everything. Carlo clapped his hands slowly, mockingly. "Very magnanimous of you, Vincent, though I have to say I'm a little disappointed. I was hoping for something more dramatic." "Life isn't a movie, Carlo. Sometimes the smart play is the boring one." "True," Carlo agreed. He stood, straightening his expensive suit. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice tonight. Your mother, she was a force to be reckoned with back in the day. The old-timers still talk about her. It's good she's back. Keeps things interesting." Vincent didn't respond to that.
He gestured for Elena to stand, and Marco moved to take her arm. She didn't resist this time, just followed numbly as they headed for the exit. At the door, Vincent paused and looked back at Carlo. "We're good?" Carlo shrugged. "We're good. But Vincent, your father kept things running smoothly because everyone knew where they stood. You're changing the rules. That makes people nervous. Nervous people make mistakes." "I'll keep that in mind." Outside, Vincent took a deep breath of cool night air. His hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline finally catching up with him. That could have gone very differently. Should have, probably. His father would have walked in there with guns blazing, consequences be damned. But he wasn't his father. Katerina was standing next to the SUV despite his instructions to stay inside. Of course she was. She watched as Marco led Elena to a separate car, the woman who'd humiliated her now reduced to a crying mess, being shipped out of the city in disgrace. "You let her go," Katerina said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Your father wouldn't have." "I know." Katerina smiled, and it was warm and proud, and everything he'd been missing for 25 years. Good. They got back in the SUV, and Marco drove them to one of Vincent's safe houses, a penthouse apartment in a building he owned under a shell corporation. It was secure, comfortable, and most importantly, private. Once inside, Katerina walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over the city lights. Vincent joined her, and for a long moment they just stood there in silence. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends on you," Katerina said. "You can go back to running your father's empire the way he taught you. You can marry someone like Elena, someone who sees you as a means to an end. You can keep making the same choices he made, walking the same path. Or, I'm not saying become a saint, Vincent. I'm saying be calculated about your violence. Your father killed my brother because he was afraid of looking weak, but there were a dozen other ways he could have handled that situation. He could have let Dmitri go with his blessing, set him up somewhere far away, used him as an asset in a new territory. Instead, he chose the bloodiest option because it was easiest. And tonight, with Elena? Tonight you showed everyone that you're willing to let people walk away if they're smart enough not to push you. That's not weakness, that's confidence. It says you don't need to kill everyone who disrespects you because your power is secure enough to withstand it. Vincent considered that. Carlo said people are nervous about me changing the rules. Good, Katerina said firmly. Let them be nervous. Nervous people think before they act. Your father had people who were terrified, and terrified people either freeze up or lash out. Neither is good for business. Make sure you like this video if you're enjoying Vincent's transformation, because we're about to explore his past and the decisions that shaped him. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Vincent walked to the bar and poured himself a scotch, then poured one for Katerina without asking. She took it with a small smile. "Tell me about the organization," she said. "What's it like now? How different is it from your father's time?" Vincent settled into one of the leather chairs, and Katerina sat across from him. He thought about how to answer, how to explain the complexities of the empire he'd inherited. "Larger," he said finally, "more diversified. My father focused on traditional revenue streams, protection, gambling, loan sharking. I've expanded into legitimate businesses, real estate, construction, waste management. We launder money through a network of corporations that would take federal investigators years to untangle." "Smart," Katerina said firmly. "What about the violence?" "Less than before, but it still happens. Has to, sometimes. We had a problem with a gang trying to move into our territory last year. Young guys, thought they were tough because they'd watched too many movies. I gave them 2 warnings. After the 3rd incident, I had to make an example." "You killed them?" "Their leader. The others got the message." Katerina nodded slowly. "And how did that make you feel?" Vincent almost laughed at the question. How did it make me feel? Like I was doing my job, like I was protecting what's mine. "Did you enjoy it?" He met her eyes. "No, I'm not a sadist, if that's what you're asking. I don't take pleasure in violence the way some of the old-timers do, but I don't lose sleep over it either. In this world, it's kill or be killed. Hesitation gets you buried." "Your father used to say the same thing." Katerina said quietly, and it was true to a point, but he started believing that every problem could be solved with a bullet, that every challenge required bloodshed. By the end, he was killing people for looking at him wrong. Vincent had seen that too. His father's paranoia had grown worse in his final years. He'd suspected betrayal everywhere, had become convinced that everyone was plotting against him. It had made him erratic, dangerous even, to his own people. "I'm not him," Vincent said. "I believe you," Katerina replied, "but you need to be careful, Vincent. This life has a way of changing people, of turning them into versions of themselves they never thought they'd become. I've watched it happen to good men, men who started out with principles and ended up as monsters." "Is that what happened to my father?" Katerina was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Maybe he was always a monster, and I just couldn't see it. Or maybe the business corrupted him slowly, one decision at a time, until the man I married didn't exist anymore. Either way, the result was the same." Vincent thought about Elena, about how he'd chosen to handle that situation. His father would have killed her, probably Carlo too, and anyone else who'd witnessed the perceived disrespect. But Vincent had walked away, had let her go. Was that weakness or strength? He honestly wasn't sure. "The men who are loyal to you in my organization, are they a threat to me?" Katerina smiled. "Would you believe me if I said no?" "Probably not." "Then let me put it this way. They're loyal to the Moretti family, to the bloodline, not to any individual. If you prove yourself worthy of that loyalty, they'll serve you faithfully. If you prove yourself to be just another petty tyrant like so many others in this business, they'll report to me and wait for a better option." "So I'm being tested?" "Constantly," Katerina agreed, "by everyone. That's the nature of power, Vincent. You don't get to keep it just because you inherited it. You have to earn it, over and over again." They talked for hours about the business, about the past, about the future. Katerina told him stories about his childhood that he'd forgotten or never knew. She told him about his grandparents on her side, Russians who'd immigrated to America after World War II with nothing but the clothes on their backs and built a small but successful import business. "Your father married me partly for that connection," she admitted. "The Russian community in this city was valuable to him. My father facilitated introductions, smoothed over cultural misunderstandings. By the time I realized what kind of man your father really was, I was in too deep to get out safely." "Until you did get out," Vincent said. "Until I had no choice," she corrected. "When Dmitri died, when I realized your father would never see the people around him as anything other than tools to be used or threats to be eliminated, I knew I couldn't raise you in that environment. I had to at least try to save myself, even if I couldn't save you." There was so much pain in her voice, so much regret. Vincent found himself reaching across the space between them to take her hand. "You saved yourself," he said. "That took courage." "It took cowardice," Katerina said bitterly. "A braver woman would have found a way to take her son with her." "A braver woman would have gotten us both killed," Vincent countered. "You knew my father. You knew what he was capable of. You made the only choice you could." If you're feeling the emotion of this reunion, go ahead and subscribe now. We've got more twists coming that will test everything Vincent thought he knew about his family and his future. As the night wore on, Vincent found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did. He was always on guard, always calculating angles and watching for threats. But here, with his mother, he felt something he'd forgotten was possible: safety. Not physical safety, but emotional safety. The freedom to be uncertain, to question himself, to admit he didn't have all the answers. Around 3 a.m, Katerina finally stood. "I should let you rest. It's been a long night." "You can stay here," Vincent said quickly. "The guest room is made up, and this place is secure. Please, I'd feel better knowing you were safe." Katerina smiled. "All right, but Vincent, don't think this means everything is fixed between us. We have decades of lost time, of pain and absence. We're going to have to work through that." "I know," he said, "but I want to try, if you're willing." "I'm willing," she said softly. "I've been willing for 25 years. I've just been waiting for you to be ready." She kissed his forehead, a gesture so maternal and familiar that it brought tears to his eyes. Then she disappeared into the guest room, leaving Vincent alone with his thoughts. He poured himself another drink and stood at the windows, looking out over the city. City, his empire, built on blood and fear and the choices of men who'd come before him. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to stay that way. His phone buzzed. A text from Marco. "Elena's on a plane to Miami. She won't be a problem." Vincent replied with a simple thumbs up, then opened his contacts. He scrolled through names, dozens of them, associates, soldiers, captains in his organization, men who'd pledged their loyalty to him when he took over from his father, men who followed his orders without question. But how many of them actually respected him? How many saw him as just another boss, another man to fear and manipulate? And how many were the ones Katerina mentioned, the ones loyal to the bloodline rather than to him personally? He thought about Carlo's warning. "You're changing the rules. That makes people nervous." Good, Vincent thought. Let them be nervous. Let them wonder what he was going to do next. Predictability was dangerous in this business. His father was predictable. Everyone knew that crossing him meant death, so they either fell in line or plotted carefully enough to not get caught. But fear alone wasn't sustainable. Eventually, someone always got brave enough or desperate enough to challenge it. Respect, though, real respect, earned through intelligence and strategic thinking, that was something different. That could last. Vincent made a decision. Tomorrow, he would start rebuilding. Not the organization itself, that was solid enough, but the culture of it, the way it operated. He would find Katerina's people, the ones loyal to the bloodline, and he would prove to them that he was worthy of that loyalty. And the ones who weren't, who were just going through the motions or plotting against him, he would identify and deal with. Not necessarily with violence, not unless they forced his hand, but he would make it clear that the Moretti organization was evolving, that the old ways, his father's ways, were being left behind. It was a risk. Changing anything in their world was a risk, but standing still, maintaining his father's brutal legacy, felt like a death sentence of a different kind, a slow erosion of his humanity until he became exactly what his father had been at the end, paranoid, cruel, and alone. He sent another text, this time to his most trusted captain, Dom Ferrara. "Meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. Get the inner circle together. Time to discuss some changes." Dom's reply came quickly. "Everything okay, boss?" "Better than okay," Vincent typed. "Tomorrow, we start building something better." He finished his drink and headed to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind was racing with plans, possibilities, concerns. What would the other families think? How would the younger generation in his own organization react? There would be pushback, resistance. Some of it would be legitimate concerns, and some would be people who benefited from the old chaos and didn't want things to change. But he had something his father never had, a partner who understood the business from the inside and wanted him to succeed without being corrupted by it. Katerina had survived 25 years on her own, maintaining connections and influence without the official backing of the Moretti name. That took skill and intelligence he could learn from. When he finally slept, he dreamed of his childhood. Not the memories he usually carried, the harsh lessons, the violence, the gradual hardening of his soul, but older ones. Memories of being small and safe, held in his mother's arms while she sang softly in Russian. Memories of laughing, of being loved without conditions or expectations. He woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee. For a moment he was disoriented, then remembered. His mother was here. She was making coffee in his kitchen like it was the most natural thing in the world. Vincent got up, threw on some clothes, and found Katerina standing at the stove, cooking eggs and toast. She changed into clothes that must have been in her overnight bag, simple and practical. "I hope you don't mind," she said, not turning around. I couldn't sleep, and I've never been good at sitting still. Mind? I can't remember the last time someone cooked for me. She laughed. What, no personal chef? I have one, technically, but I usually just eat at restaurants or grab whatever's easy. Cooking feels too domestic, too normal. And God forbid you be normal, Katerina said, but there was affection in her voice, not criticism. They ate breakfast together, and Vincent filled her in on his plans for the day, the meeting with his inner circle, the changes he wanted to implement. She listened carefully, asking questions, pointing out potential pitfalls he hadn't considered. You'll need to frame it carefully, she said. Don't make it sound like you're criticizing your father's methods directly. That will put people on the defensive, make them choose sides. Instead, position it as evolution. The world has changed, so the organization has to change with it. That's good, Vincent said, making mental notes. What else? Start small. Pick one thing to change, implement it successfully, then move on to the next. If you try to overhaul everything at once, you'll create chaos and give your enemies an opening. They discussed strategy for over an hour, and Vincent was impressed by his mother's tactical mind. She'd been out of the game officially for decades, but she still understood the psychology of it, the chess game of power and loyalty. Comment below if you think Vincent's new approach will work, and make sure you're subscribed because we're heading toward a confrontation that will determine the future of the entire organization. At 9:30, Marco arrived to drive them to the meeting location, a private room in a restaurant Vincent owned, swept daily for bugs and secure from external surveillance. Katerina teamed with him, which raised Marco's eyebrows, but no comment. Word had already spread through the organization about last night's events. Everyone knew Vincent's mother was back. The inner circle was already waiting when they arrived. 8 men, ranging in age from their late 30s to mid-60s. They were the captains who controlled various aspects of the organization: drugs, gambling, construction, waste management, legitimate businesses, and enforcement. Together, they represented hundreds of soldiers and associates, millions of dollars in annual revenue, and enough firepower to start a small war. They all stood when Vincent entered, a sign of respect he'd earned by proving himself ruthless enough to hold his father's throne. But he saw the questions in their eyes, the uncertainty. His father had run these meetings like a dictator, issuing orders and expecting obedience. What would Vincent do? Sit, he said simply, taking his place at the head of the table. Katerina sat to his right, a position of honor that didn't go unnoticed. Gentlemen, most of you know why I've called this meeting. For those who don't, let me be clear. Last night, my mother returned after 25 years. She's not dead, as my father claimed. She's very much alive, and she will be taking an active role in organizational decisions moving forward. The silence was absolute. I could see the wheels turning in each man's head, calculating what this meant for them, for their positions, for the balance of power. It was Dom Ferrara who spoke first. With all due respect, boss, your mother has been out of the business for a long time. Things have changed. They have, Vincent agreed, which is exactly why her perspective is valuable. She sees things we might miss because we're too close to it. She understands the old ways and can help us bridge to new ones. And what new ways are those? Asked Carlo Benedetto, one of the older captains. He'd served Vincent's father faithfully for 30 years, and Vincent knew he was a valuable asset and a potential threat if he decided the changes were too radical. We're not changing what we do, Vincent said carefully, remembering his mother's advice. We're changing how we do it, making our operation more efficient, more profitable, and less likely to attract unwanted attention from law enforcement. He laid out his vision, reducing street-level violence, focusing on high-margin legitimate businesses to launder money more effectively, using technology to streamline operations, building alliances with other families instead of constantly fighting for territory. This sounds like going soft, Anthony Russo said, one of the younger captains. He was ambitious, aggressive, and Vincent had suspected for a while that he was positioning himself for an eventual power play. No, Vincent said firmly, this sounds like being smart. My father ruled through fear, and it worked for him, but it also made us enemies we didn't need and cost us opportunities we should have taken. Every time we kill someone, we create problems, federal investigations, revenge attacks, power vacuums that someone else might fill. Violence should be a last resort, not a first response.
Your father wouldn't have approved, Anthony said, and there was challenge in his voice. Before Vincent could respond, Katerina spoke. My husband was a brilliant man in many ways, but his paranoia and his need to be feared above all else created instability. He killed my brother, his own right-hand man, because he couldn't tolerate the idea of anyone leaving the organization. That's not strength, that's weakness. It says you're so insecure in your power that you can't let people make their own choices. The room erupted in murmurs. Katerina had just said what no one else dared, that Vincent's father had been flawed, maybe even unstable. Anthony stood up, his face flushed. Who the hell do you think you are, coming in here and— Sit down, Anthony, Vincent said, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. She's right. My father was brilliant, but he made mistakes, and I'm not going to repeat them. Anthony sat, but his expression was mutinous. Vincent made a mental note. That was going to be a problem sooner rather than later. Here's what's going to happen, Vincent continued. We're implementing a new dispute resolution protocol. Before any violence is authorized, it comes through me. No more freelancing, no more settling scores on your own. Every action is calculated, strategic, and serves the organization's interests, not your personal pride. And if someone needs killing? Dom asked, pragmatic as always. Then they get killed, Vincent said simply. But we're going to be smart about it. No more broad daylight hits that end up on the news. No more bodies turning up in public places. If someone has to disappear, they disappear completely. He went through the rest of his plans, fielding questions and objections, adjusting his approach based on the feedback. By the end of 2 hours, he'd gotten reluctant buy-in from most of the captains. Anthony was still hostile, and a couple of the older guys were skeptical, but they were willing to see how it played out. After the formal meeting ended and most of the captains had left, Dom lingered behind with 2 of the others, Carlo Benedetto and Michael Chen, who ran the organization's operations in Chinatown. Boss, can we speak frankly? Dom asked. Always. Anthony's going to be a problem. He's got ambition, and now he thinks you're weak. He's going to test you. I know. I'm handling it. How? Carlo asked. Because if you're serious about this new approach, you can't just kill him for disagreeing with you. I'm not going to kill him. I'm going to give him enough rope to hang himself. I have people watching him. If he makes a move against me or tries to undermine what we're building, I'll have proof, and then I'll handle it appropriately. And if he's smart enough not to get caught? Michael asked. Vincent smiled coldly. Then he's earned his position, and we work with him. But he's not that smart. He thinks he is, but he's not. Katerina had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. There's another option. What's that? Vincent asked. Give him what he wants, or what he thinks he wants. Promote him, give him more responsibility, more territory to manage. Then watch him fail. Men like Anthony think they're ready for more power, but they haven't done the work to be ready. When he inevitably screws up, you can reassign him to something smaller without it looking like punishment. You're just recognizing his strengths and putting him where he fits best. Dom laughed. That's devious. I like it. It's practical, Katerina corrected, and it avoids bloodshed while still neutering the threat. Vincent considered the idea. It was risky. Giving Anthony more power could backfire spectacularly, but it also showed confidence, showed he wasn't afraid of challenges, and if it worked, it would make his point better than any speech about new approaches. All right, he decided, we'll try it your way. Dom, set up a meeting with Anthony. Tell him I have a special assignment for him. After they left, Vincent turned to his mother. That was a risk. Life is risk, she said with a shrug. You either manage it or let it manage you. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see how Vincent's gamble with Anthony plays out, because things are about to get very complicated. Drop a like if you're enjoying this story of family, power, and redemption.
Over the next few weeks, Vincent implemented his changes gradually. The new dispute resolution protocol went into effect, and to his surprise, it was largely successful. Street-level violence dropped by 40% in the first month. Federal surveillance, which had been intense, seemed to ease off as the organization became less obviously criminal in its operations. Anthony got his promotion, control over the entire waterfront, a prime piece of territory that generated millions annually. At first, he seemed to thrive, but as Katerina had predicted, he wasn't ready for the complexity of managing that much operation. Shipments got delayed, money went missing, his subordinates started complaining to Vincent directly, breaking the chain of command. Vincent watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. Anthony was learning a hard lesson about the difference between ambition and capability. Katerina had moved into the penthouse permanently, and they'd fallen into a routine. Breakfast together most mornings, discussing business, and gradually getting to know each other again. She was sharp, insightful, and ruthless when she needed to be. Vincent found himself relying on her advice more and more. She also brought stability to other parts of his life. The Russian community in the city, which had been cool toward the organization since her departure, began warming up again. Old connections were renewed, new alliances formed. It turned out Katerina had maintained relationships throughout her exile, keeping one foot in the world even as she stayed away from the center of it. One evening, about a month after her return, they were having dinner when she said, "You need to think about your future, Vincent, beyond the business." "What do you mean?" "I mean a real life, a family. You're 35 years old. You spend every waking moment managing the organization, and for what? So you can die alone, like your father?" Vincent was quiet. He'd been thinking the same thing lately, especially after the Elena disaster. He'd been so focused on maintaining power that he'd never considered what he actually wanted from life beyond that. "I don't know if family is possible for someone like me," he admitted. "The business is dangerous. Anyone I care about becomes a target." "That's true," Katerina agreed, "but it's also an excuse. Plenty of men in this life have families. Your father had us. Other bosses have wives, children. It requires precautions, yes, security measures, but it's possible if you want it." "Do you think I should want it?" She smiled sadly. "I think you should want something more than this. Power is addictive, Vincent, but it's also empty. At the end of the day, it doesn't love you back. It doesn't care about you. The moment you show weakness, it abandons you." "That's bleak. That's honest. I'm not saying give up the organization. I'm saying build something alongside it, something that's just yours, separate from the business." Vincent thought about that over the following days. What did he want? Who did he want to be when he wasn't being the boss, the leader, the heir to his father's bloody legacy? The answer surprised him. He wanted to be the man his mother seemed to believe he could be. Someone who was powerful but not cruel, strategic but not heartless, someone who commanded respect rather than just fear. He started making more changes. He funded a scholarship program for kids from the neighborhood, anonymous donations that helps young people get out and make something of themselves. He strong-armed landlords in his territory into maintaining their buildings properly, making sure people had heat in winter and working elevators year-round. Small things that his father would have seen as waste, but that built goodwill in the community. The other families noticed. Some thought he was going soft. Others saw the strategic brilliance. A population that benefited from your presence was a population that protected you, that warned you when law enforcement came around, that closed ranks against outsiders. 3 months after Katerina's return, Anthony finally made his move. He'd been careful, building alliances with other dissatisfied members of the organization, people who thought Vincent's new approach was weakness. He called a meeting of his supporters and proposed a vote of no confidence in Vincent's leadership. Vincent found out about it within hours. One of the people Anthony had approached was actually one of Katerina's longtime loyalists. Instead of showing up to confront Anthony directly, Vincent waited. He let Anthony make his pitch, let him think he had momentum. Then, the night before the planned vote, Vincent called his own meeting. Every captain, every significant player in the organization. He laid out everything: the increased profits since his new policies went into effect, the decreased law enforcement pressure, the new alliances that had been formed. He showed them the numbers, cold and undeniable. Anthony Russo believes I've made us weak. He's been saying I'm not my father, and he's right. I'm not my father. I'm better. My father ruled for 20 years and left me an organization that was profitable but vulnerable. In 3 months, I've increased our revenue by 18%, reduced our legal exposure by 43%, and expanded our influence into markets we've never touched before. He paused, looking around the room at faces that were calculating, considering. Anthony wants to return to the old ways, the ways that got people killed and sent to prison, the ways that made us rich but kept us looking over our shoulders constantly. I'm offering something different, not softer, smarter, not weaker, more strategic. But if anyone here agrees with Anthony, if you think his way is better, vote for him. I'm not my father. I won't kill you for disagreeing with me, but know this. If Anthony wins, I'm out. I'll disappear like my mother did, and you'll have to live with the consequences of bringing back the old ways. Federal task forces, gang wars, the constant threat of betrayal and violence. That's what you're choosing.
The vote wasn't even close. Anthony had thought he had 20 supporters. Turned out, he had 3. Everyone else saw what Vincent had accomplished and decided the new way was better than nostalgia for chaos. Anthony himself didn't show up to the meeting. Vincent heard later that he'd skipped town, gone to Miami to lay low for a while. Vincent let him go. The man was broken, his ambitions crushed. Killing him would serve no purpose except satisfying ego. If you're still watching, you're part of something special. Hit that like button and leave a comment telling me what you thought of how Vincent handled Anthony. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This story still has one more twist before we wrap up. After the vote, after everyone had left, Katerina found Vincent standing alone in the empty meeting room. "You did good today," she said. "I had a good teacher." She hugged him and he held on tight. This woman who'd been a ghost for most of his life and was now more real than almost anyone else in his world. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You're becoming the man I always hoped you'd be." Those words broke something inside him, some last wall he'd built to protect himself. He cried for the first time since he was a child, for all the years lost, for all the choices made, for the future that was finally possible. 6 months later, the Moretti organization was thriving. Vincent had successfully transitioned from his father's brutal legacy to his own more calculated approach. The other families had accepted the change, seeing the benefits of less chaos and more cooperation. The police were still watching, but they had less to work with. Fewer bodies, fewer witnesses willing to talk. Katerina had become his most trusted advisor, the one person whose counsel he sought on every major decision. She'd rebuilt her network, renewed old alliances, and brought a stability to the organization that Vincent hadn't realized was possible. He'd also started dating again, carefully, with proper security precautions. A lawyer who worked in corporate law, smart and independent, and completely outside the life. She knew what he was. He'd been honest about that from the start. But she accepted it as long as he kept that world separate from their relationship. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still threats, still nights when Vincent had to make hard choices. But he was making them as himself now, not as his father's shadow. One evening, he and Katerina were having dinner at the penthouse when she said, "I've been thinking about something. Should I be worried?" She laughed. "Maybe. I want to write a book." "A book? About what?" "About the life. About what it's really like for the women in this world, the wives and mothers and daughters who have to navigate the violence and the loyalty and the impossible choices. My story, but not just mine, others too." Vincent was quiet, thinking about the implications. That could be dangerous. Names would have to be changed, but people would still know. "I know," she said, "which is why I'm asking your permission. This is your world now, your organization. I won't do anything that would harm it." He thought about it. The book would draw attention, would maybe even attract law enforcement scrutiny, but it would also humanize them, show the complexity of their lives in a way most people never considered.
And his mother deserved to tell her story, to reclaim her narrative after decades of being erased. Write it, he decided, but run it by our lawyers first. Make sure it doesn't cross any legal lines. She smiled, that warm, proud smile that still made him feel like a kid who'd done something right. Thank you. As the months turned into a year and then two, Vincent continued building his vision of what the organization could be. He partnered with legitimate businesses, investing in technology startups and real estate development. He used his influence to support local politicians who would protect the neighborhood, make sure people had jobs and opportunities. He never forgot what he was, never pretended the violence and crime weren't real, but he tried to minimize them, to be strategic about when and how they were used. And slowly, grudgingly, the other families started following his example. Not completely, there were still old-school bosses who would never change, but enough that the landscape of organized crime in the city began to shift. The feds noticed, of course. They'd been building a RICO case for years, but Vincent's new approach made it harder to prosecute. The violence that usually provided the clearest evidence was down. The witnesses were fewer. The operation looked more like legitimate business with some unfortunate associates. 3 years after Katerina's return, they finally indicted Vincent. The charges were serious, but based largely on testimony from low-level associates who didn't know enough to be truly damaging. Vincent's lawyers, the best money could buy, tore the prosecution's case apart. Reasonable doubt everywhere they looked. The trial lasted 4 months. Katerina attended every day, sitting in the gallery in quiet support. When the verdict came back, not guilty on all counts, Vincent felt relief wash over him, not because he'd been innocent, but because he'd been smart enough to insulate himself from direct prosecution. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Vincent ignored them, but Katerina stopped and spoke to them. "My son is a businessman," she said clearly. "He's worked hard to build something legitimate, to give people in his community opportunities. The prosecution tried to paint him as some kind of monster, but the jury saw the truth. He's a good man trying to make his way in a difficult world." It was a brilliant performance, positioning Vincent as a victim of overzealous prosecutors while subtly acknowledging the reality everyone knew but couldn't prove. As they drove away from the courthouse, Vincent looked at his mother and said, "Thank you for everything, for coming back, for teaching me a better way." "You taught yourself," she said. "I just reminded you who you could be." Vincent thought about Elena sometimes, wondered what had become of her. He'd heard through connections that she'd married a hedge fund manager in Miami, was living a comfortable, if slightly boring life. Good for her, he thought. She'd gotten what she wanted, status and money, just not with him. He thought about his father, too, about the man who'd shaped so much of his life while never really understanding him. His father had been powerful, feared, successful by every metric that mattered in their world. But he died alone, with only his son at his bedside, surrounded by people who feared him but didn't love him.
Vincent didn't want that ending. He wanted something different, something his father had never achieved, a life that mattered beyond the organization, a legacy that wasn't just built on fear and violence, but on the people he'd helped, the opportunities he'd created, the example he'd set. It wasn't perfect. He still had to make hard choices, still had to authorize actions that kept him awake some nights. But he was trying to be better, to be more than his father's shadow. And with his mother's guidance, with the organization's grudging acceptance of his new approach, he thought maybe he was succeeding. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because stories like this one, stories about redemption, power, and the complicated bonds of family are what this channel is all about. Leave a comment telling me what you thought about Vincent's journey, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. It really helps the channel grow. 5 years after that dinner party where everything changed, Vincent Moretti stood at the window of his penthouse, looking out over the city, his city. But he didn't see it the way his father had, as territory to be controlled, enemies to be crushed, money to be extracted. He saw it as a complex ecosystem where he played a role, important but not omnipotent.
His mother's book had been published a year ago, a bestseller that had sparked conversations about women and organized crime, about the impossible choices people made, about the humanity behind the headlines. She'd been careful with names and details, but the emotions were raw and real. Reading it had taught Vincent things about her pain, her sacrifice, that she'd never said directly. The organization was stable now, more profitable than ever, and less violent. There were still problems, there would always be problems, but they were manageable. The other families had mostly accepted the new paradigm. The younger generation coming up in the life saw Vincent's approach as the template for the future. He heard the door open behind him, felt his mother's presence. "Thinking deep thoughts?" she asked. "Just reflecting," he said. "5 years ago, my life was on a path that would have ended badly, and then you came back." "You made the choice to change," Katerina said. "I just reminded you that you had a choice." "Still," Vincent said, turning to face her, "thank you for having the courage to come back, for risking everything to save me from becoming him." Katerina hugged him, and they stood there for a long moment, mother and son, reunited against all odds. "What now?" Vincent asked. "What's next for us?" Katerina pulled back and smiled. "Now we keep building, keep proving that power doesn't have to corrupt, that this life doesn't have to destroy everyone it touches. Your father couldn't see that, but you can, and that makes all the difference." As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the skyline, Vincent Moretti felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not naive hope, not the kind that ignored reality, but real, grounded hope that the future could be different from the past, that he could be different. He wasn't his father. He never would be. And finally, after all these years, he understood that wasn't a weakness. It was his greatest strength. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, I want to thank you for watching. Please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on Vincent's transformation. Did he make the right choices? Could you see yourself in his position? Let me know what you think. And if you enjoyed this story, check out the other videos on the channel. We have tons of dramatic stories just like this one waiting for you. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.